God is good.
All the time.
And all the time.
God is good.
Now, I know the last couple of weeks I did object lessons where I brought in stuff. And today I'm going to pass on that one. Daniel, you're catching on. You're thinking. All right, so the problem with either or thinking, and here's a good illustration for that. Old people at weddings always poke me and say, "You're next." So I started doing the same thing to them at funerals. You're next. You're next. See, we think we either have to be nice or we have to be mean, but sometimes we can just be what? Clever, and we can get the point across. All right, so here we are, the story of the woman caught in adultery, and so they bring her before Jesus, and they all stand there, and they're all condemning her. And my question is, how did they catch her in the act? I mean, it doesn't take all that long, right? Not to be crude or not to be crass. It's not like this is 3 hours, and they can just say, well, she's going to be with Johnny, from, 9 till noon. We'll just stop by whenever it's convenient. So they really had to be planning meticulously to make this happen. So obviously they wanted to catch her. Obviously they wanted to bring her before Jesus. And as you look at the story, Jesus he's teaching. It's early. He's there, and the scribes and the Pharisees in verse 3, they bring this woman who's been caught in adultery, and they put her in the midst, and everyone's looking at her. All the attention is on her. So, think about that time when you were in maybe elementary school and you passed gas in class, or something that would be really just mortifying, right? And the whole class gets quiet, and everyone looks at you, and your face starts to what? Turn red, and your forehead is just hot, and your ears are glowing. Imagine this woman, and at least in elementary school, if you eat glue, pick your nose, or pass gas, no one's going to kill you for it. Here's a woman who's facing the death penalty. But interestingly, where's the man? She doesn't commit adultery by herself, right? So where is the man? That's the big question. And so as I'm examining this text, and I'm thinking about the problem of either or thinking, the first problem that comes to my mind with either or thinking is it's short-sighted. Either this woman dies, or Jesus isn't who he says he is, right? Because they bring her in front of Jesus, and they say, what are you going to do about it? The law of Moses says you've got to stone her. Either or thinking. Right now it's short-sighted. It's not thinking clearly, because if they really wanted to follow this letter of the law commands that the man would have to be brought forward too. So it's short-sighted, and it's also about protecting the interests of the people in the group. They have a stance against Jesus. They're jealous of him because he's getting a lot of attention from the everyday people. And so the scribes and the Pharisees, who want to be the gatekeepers of knowledge, they want to be considered the experts. They want to have all the religious authority. They don't think they should share that with Jesus. Also, they have a different idea of what the Messiah should be like. And Jesus just doesn't fit into that. And so it's short-sighted thinking. It's protecting their interests, and they're not really genuine in their efforts. And so it's a false dilemma. Jesus, the law says we have to stone her. What do you say about her? And we face false dilemmas all the time. People try to get you in a position where you take one side or the other. What's the real issue here, though, for Jesus? When they bring this woman who's caught in the law, caught in the act of adultery, which is against the Mosaic law, what's at stake here? What you may not remember is the Jewish nation in the days of Jesus didn't have the authority to execute anyone. They were in occupied territory. Rome was in control. If you've forgotten, think to when Jesus' trial comes, right? Garden of Gethsemane, he's captured, they take him to trial. They want to have him crucified, and they don't have the authority to do that. Rome is the only one who can execute people. The Jewish people don't have the authority to carry out an execution. So, if Jesus does execute the woman, now who is he in trouble with? If he says, yes, we must stone her, let's kill her. If he endorses that, who's he in trouble with? The Roman government, right? Pontius Pilate, he's in Jerusalem. He's the governor there. He's going to get in trouble with the authorities. But if he says no, let's not stone her. Now who is he in trouble with? All the religious people. Obviously, he's not a prophet because the law of Moses clearly states it. So he would be denying the clear teaching. And that would prove he's not the prophet to come. So that's the dilemma. That's the horns of the dilemma that they try to put Jesus into. And so, see, there's no way out of this for Jesus with either or thinking. If you use either or thinking, there's no way out. Either he has to have her killed and he's going to be taken care of by Rome, or he doesn't have her killed and now he's in trouble with the people, and it disqualifies him as a religious authority, as a prophet, as a rabbi. And so the third problem with either or thinking, if that's what you use, you think you're smarter than everyone else. You think there are no other options than the ones that you present. It's prideful. It's arrogant. So time out for a second. Does that mean there are no either or issues in life? Everybody in here, I'm guessing, drives a car that uses gasoline, right? What happens if you go to the pump and you put diesel fuel in? First of all, you can't because the nozzle is a different size, just so that you don't make that mistake. But what if you've got a gas can, a fuel can, and you go ahead and you fill it up with diesel fuel, and you have it home because maybe you've got a tractor or a bobcat, I don't know, and your teenager says, well, hey, I'm low on gas, I don't think I can make it to the gas station. Well, go out in the shed and get the can. And they grab the wrong one with diesel and they put it in. What's going to happen? It's not going to work, is it? So there are some either-or things. There are true and there are false issues. But the problem with always using either-or thinking, it's prideful, it's arrogant. I'm the smartest one in the room. Now, for example, right now, the elections are starting to gear up, right? I mean, we've got the debates on TV, right? And so there's an either-or thought that says, well, either you vote or you don't get to complain about who the elected official is, right? If you don't vote, then you can't complain. Well, what if the reality of it is that there isn't a good candidate to vote for? What if, let's just say, and I don't even know who's going to be the potential candidates in the future for next year, but let's just say there's a candidate that neither one is a good choice. Well, a lot of people say, well, let's choose the lesser of two evils. Well, then aren't you still choosing an evil? Does that work? Right? So either or thinking doesn't always work. So here's Jesus. They bring the woman in front of her. They say, well, we've got to stone her. And what does Jesus do? He bends down and he starts writing in the dust. Have you ever wondered, what is it that he writes in the dust? Does he write Deuteronomy chapter 17, verse 7? And I know that you're all students of the first 5 books of the Bible, so you know Deuteronomy 17:7. That's if you're going to stone someone. That's the passage that says the witness, the one who observes this, they're the ones to first lay hands on her, to first throw a stone. So is that what he writes down in the dust? Or maybe it's Leviticus 20:10. Leviticus 20:10 actually talks about if someone is caught in the act of adultery. And you know what it says? Both the man and the woman are to be put to death. So maybe that's what Jesus is writing down. And then I look at this picture and I think about the scenario that Jesus is writing in the dust. What if he's writing the names of the men who have been with her in the dust? Maybe when they catch her in the act of adultery, it's because they already know who she is and they're using her for their selfish purposes to try to embarrass, humiliate, or disqualify Jesus. So the religious pride of the scribes and the Pharisees have blinded them to their own faults. And that's another problem with either or thinking. Either I'm right or you're wrong. And when was the last time you wanted to ever admit that you were wrong? When was the last time? How easy is that to say, no, I was wrong, you were right. So they continue to ask him, right? And so he stands up, so they're pestering him. Jesus, what are you going to do? Jesus, what should we do? Here's what the law says. What do we do? They continue to ask him, and he stands up and he says to them, Ooh, let him who is without sin among you. Now, is it without sinning with her or without being sinful? You have to think about that one. Let him who is without sin among you be the first to throw a stone at her. And once again, he bends down and he begins to write in the dust. And so they're standing there. Now, we didn't think of that one. We thought either he's going to stone her or he's going to say not to. So here we are with our either-or thinking. And here's a big problem with either-or thinking. It's meant to polarize people. It's meant to make you choose two sides when there might be more options to choose from. And any time that you use rhetoric or logic or reasoning, any time that you talk with people and use either-or to polarize people, you immediately stunt the growth of everyone. Everyone in the room is now dumber for having heard what you have just said, right? You've stunted your growth and everyone else's growth because you've narrowed it down to just two options. In other words, either-or thinking isn't creative. It's not a problem-solving thought process. I read something in the Harvard Business Review last week, and I thought it was worthwhile to share that it tied in well with this. Roger Martin, who I have no idea who he is, he says, I've spent the past 15 years first as a management consultant and now as the dean of a business school, and I believe that's Harvard, studying leaders with exemplary records. Over the past 6 years, I've interviewed more than 50 such leaders, for some as long as 8 hours. Now here's where it gets interesting. And I found that most of them share a somewhat unusual trait. Now these are leaders in all segments, CEOs, mayors, governors. These are influential people. They have the predisposition and the capacity to hold in their heads two opposing ideas at once. And then, without panicking, or simply settling for one alternative or the other, they're able to creatively resolve the tension between those two ideas by generating a new one that contains elements of the others but is superior to both. The law of Moses says to stone her. What do you want to do? Do I want to kill her or do I want to give her grace? This process of consideration and synthesis can be termed integrative thinking. It is this discipline, not superior strategy or faultless execution, that is a defining characteristic of most exceptional businesses and the people who run them. And then I thought back to an author who's been long dead. In fact, he died in his 40s because he didn't take very good care of himself. And he had a great career when it came to writing, but Hemingway said the worst thing that an author can have is success with their first book. And one of his first books was his best and only success. Anybody read The Great Gatsby? Right? F. Scott Fitzgerald says, the test of a first-rate intelligence, I should say said, since he's been dead for a while, the test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold two opposed ideas in the mind at the same time and still retain the ability to function. One should, for example, be able to see that things are hopeless and yet be determined to make them otherwise. To be able to hold two different ideas. And nobody, and that's one of the things I love about this story, nobody in the crowd that morning could have guessed what Jesus' response would be. Okay, they've got this woman caught in adultery, and the law clearly says we have to stone her, but we know that here we are as oppressed people by the Romans. We don't have the ability to do that. Wonder what Jesus is going to do. Nobody could have guessed at the response. They just couldn't have done it. Either or thinking. We come to it naturally. It seems to be an easy default. So how do I overcome that? How do I get past and how do I overcome the idea of either or thinking? Well, for starters, it calls for humility. In other words, we have to recognize I don't always have all the answers. And unfortunately, we live in a culture, I think, that promotes the idea that you always have the answers and you should always have a quick answer. You should always be able to give an answer without having to think through it. So we have to recognize we don't always have all the answers, and there just may be some alternatives that we haven't considered. So why is it that we want either or thinking? We want everything to be simple, and we want certainty. I want a simple answer, and I want to have some certainty. But life isn't like that. Life is messy. Life is complex. I can't always have certainty instantly. I can't always have things simplistic. And so probably what we need is to be able to think holistically. We need to be able to think beyond just either or. And for example, probably need to look for some overlap. So let me give you some examples of either or thinking that there might be another alternative to. There may not be one, but there might be one. iPhone or Android, right? What about the BlackBerry? I guess they've been buried, I don't know. Does anyone even have a BlackBerry anymore? I loved my BlackBerry when they used to have them. The keyboard was great. I don't do so great with the touch screen. All right, how about this one? Fox or NPR? Help me out, Mike. There's got to be another alternative, right? I don't want to put you on the spot. But there's got to be other alternatives.
Neither one.
Huh?
Neither one.
Neither one. Okay. All right, so we've got a neither one. All right, let's really get a debate going, guys. So let's talk about that one. I'm just kidding. So there are other news sources out there, right? I'll give you one to think about. We're in church, so we can talk about this. How about evolution versus creationism? No, there's a tough one. So, younger creationists believe that the earth is only 6,000 years old. But boy, there's a lot of evidence that the earth is probably 4.5 billion years old. Young earth creationists believe that the whole universe isn't any more than 10,000 years old. But there's a lot of evidence that the universe itself is about 13.5 billion years old. All right? Now, there's a lot of people who think that when the Bible says God creates in 6 days and rests on the seventh, that's literal 24-hour days. But there are passages in the Bible that says a day is to the Lord as what? Or 1,000 years is to the Lord as a day. So is that a literal 24-hour day? Now, I personally do believe, let me just say so there's no doubt, that God created. God spoke and it happened. I don't believe in evolution. But I'll say this. If that's how God chose to bring life into existence, who am I to argue with that? I don't believe that. I don't believe God used evolution because evolution calls for a lot of random chance and a lot of false starts and a long period of time for things to happen. But you know what? On the day of judgment, I don't think that God is going to have a line that lets people into heaven because you understood how things were created perfectly, and a line that goes through a trapdoor and said, oh, you loved me, but you got this one wrong. Now, there's some people out there in the religious world that talk about theistic evolution and say that God used evolution to create and to bring us to where we are today. I'm just throwing that out there to say, here's an alternative. You've got Darwinism, you've got creationism, and then theistic evolution, which I don't buy into, but I'm just saying it's another alternative. Do you hear what I'm saying? I'm saying I don't have all the answers. I don't know exactly how it all happened, but I'm saying in your either or thinking, sometimes there are alternatives. And then there's a sad one. The holidays are coming up. And sometimes, you know, there's times in life where you don't always get along with everyone in your family. Let's just face it. Families are messy. Families can be messed up. Some families can put the fun in dysfunctional, but there's a lot of problems out there. And sometimes at the holidays, you have to choose. You're either going to be with me or you're going to be with the other parents. Or you're going to be with me or you're going to be with that sibling. But if you're with them, you're not with me. Well, that's not right, is it? So there's either or thinking that doesn't work out. So we need to be able to see things holistically. We need to be creative thinkers. We need to be problem solvers. So look again at the text, John chapter 8. And here's kind of where we wrap things up. Here's kind of where the rubber meets the road. So he bends down in verse 8. He's writing on the ground. And when they hear it, verse 9, what happens? They went away, one by one, beginning with the older ones because they're smarter. They caught on first. And Jesus was left alone with the woman standing before him. So Jesus stands up in verse 10. And he says to her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" Out of all this big crowd, all these people who had a taste for blood, they were ready to get you. Isn't there one that's going to throw a stone? Won't one of them condemn you? And I can just imagine her. She's probably still not looking up. She's probably still having a hard time making eye contact. She's probably still feeling very shameful, very embarrassed, very humiliated. Verse 11, she said, "No one, Lord." And Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go, and from now on, sin no more." Great part of the story. It's not just that he gives her grace and forgiveness, but he gives her the opportunity to be transformed. And that's part of the gospel. The gospel isn't just about having your sins forgiven and removing the consequences, right? Here she is. She's facing some serious consequences, and Jesus helps alleviate that. But he shows her how to move on, and that is to sin no more. But here's what I liked even more. And this is what's really important if you're stuck with using either or thinking a lot in your life. So it's black or white. There's no shades of gray. I'm right, you're wrong. Here's what I really love about this story. And I'm not sure that I really saw it before this week as I began working on this sermon. Jesus doesn't accept the responsibility for their burden. The crowd, they come to her. They come to him and they say, "We want to know what you have to say." He doesn't agree. He doesn't disagree. He gives them a third alternative. Okay. He's not saying out loud, but okay, the law of Moses says stone her. I want to show this woman grace. And so instead of accepting the responsibility for the burden they come to them, he puts it back on them. Okay. You who are without sin, you throw the first stone. And I love that because I never really saw it before. He puts the burden that they bring back on them and releases her at the same time from their trap. And that's pretty amazing. For me, the either-or thinkers, they want to use fear, right? Oh, she's done wrong. She needs to be punished. They want to shame her. She was caught in the act of adultery. And Jesus uses love to give her transformation, open up a new way of life. So, don't let people squeeze you into their, rock in a hard place, all right? So, let me finish with this. Don't let people hook you on the horns of their dilemma. Instead, look to the example of Jesus to be able to show love and grace and mercy, even in the darkest of situations.